In the early 1930s, few people had greater reason to curse Mother Nature than residents of the Tennessee River Valley. Every spring brought on an onslaught from above. Up to 6 feet of rain pounded the valley each year, making it one of the wettest and flood-prone regions in all of North America.
Well, the Great Tennessee River was a beautiful river, but it could be a deadly one. Engineers called it a flashy river, and that meant it could rise from a relatively mild stream to a raging killer in a very short time.
Floods took a frightening human toll. Hundreds were killed, thousands left homeless, forced to take refuge in tents. The river left no life untouched, even the lives of children.
As a matter of fact, the first word I ever said was water coming down. There had been a little flood on the little stream in front of my house. So I didn't just speak a word. I said water coming down.
The rains took a toll on the land as well. Each year, the valley lost tons of precious topsoil. Where cotton and corn once thrived, the land now bore brutal scars of erosion. This was the sorry state of life in the hills of Appalachia. The rains kept people from ever getting ahead. Farmers lived in shacks without electric lights or running water. There were no radios, no refrigerators, no modern conveniences. The tired soil kept people on the brink of starvation. Without a sound economy, there was little money for things like education. Children learned just the basics in drafty one-room schools. There was little money for adequate health care either. 1/3 of the valley was stricken every year by a disease unheard of in most of the United States, malaria. In many ways, the Tennessee Valley was 100 years behind the times and showed little promise of ever catching up. Ironically, the very river that had brought decades of disaster could also provide salvation. Water was the valley's greatest natural asset. If properly developed, it could provide a vital route for shipping and enough electric power to fuel an industrial revolution. What residents needed was the money and the know-how to harness the river's great potential. They would get it in 1933 as part of President Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal. As Roosevelt took office, the entire nation was suffering the same economic misfortunes that had befallen the Tennessee Valley for generations. The Great Depression robbed 15 million people of their jobs, 25% of the workforce. Shanty towns popped up everywhere, filled with drifters seeking employment. Men paraded through towns to offer their labor for $1 a week.
Much of the country had simply, I think, given up. A sort of depression psychosis develops, where you haven't found a job and you haven't found a job, and hopelessness becomes a fundamental fact of your life.
The Great Depression hit the Tennessee Valley especially hard. Here, entire families lived on less than $100 a year.
The South, compared with the rest of the nation, was much poorer. Everything that was bad in the nation was compounded in the South and made even worse in the Appalachian area.
This great nation will endure as it has endured, will revive and will prosper.
At his inauguration, President Roosevelt promised quick action to rescue the country from poverty, and he picked the bleakest spot he could find, the Tennessee Valley, to lead the way. At the river town of Muscle Shoals, Roosevelt proposed a wild scheme, a federal super agency that would tame the river by building a system of giant dams.
We are here because the Muscle Shoals development and the Tennessee River development as a whole are national in their aspect and are going to be treated from a national point of view.
Construction would provide desperately needed jobs, and dams would ultimately generate power to improve people's lives. The Tennessee Valley Authority, the TVA, was given unprecedented powers over a huge portion of the southeastern United States. 40,000 square miles were involved, nearly all of Tennessee and parts of Kentucky, Virginia, North Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, and Mississippi. Roosevelt included the entire Tennessee River, all 652 miles, as well as thousands of miles of tributaries, an entire watershed.
Altogether, then, what he saw was a system of regional planning, the first real attempt to do that anywhere in this country. And using the Tennessee Valley as a model, if TVA worked for the social and economic development of that entire region, then he thought we could replicate other TVAs around the country, and eventually he envisioned a national planning agency, a national TVA.
President Roosevelt proposed the TVA in his first 100 days in office. The bill was highly controversial and extremely vague about precisely what TVA would do. But the president rammed it through Congress in just 5 weeks. To lead his bold experiment, the president picked 2 men who would become one of history's great odd couples. Actually, the TVA board was comprised of 3 members, but 2 of the 3 quickly stood out for their unbridled drive and ambition. For chairman, the president picked America's foremost hydraulic engineer, Arthur Morgan.
My father was very tough-minded, but soft-hearted. He had this enormous commitment to human well-being, to humanity, to the future.
Morgan was the epitome of the self-made man. He had quit college after just 2 months to travel. He picked up technical skills by working as a logger, miner, and farmhand. Morgan used his knowledge to build an innovative flood control project in Ohio, which won international acclaim. Despite his lack of formal training, Morgan became president of Antioch College, a small experimental school in Yellow Springs, Ohio.
He was definitely a dreamer, but he was also extremely able in bringing his dreams to life. He has been characterized as a utopian, but he was a down-to-earth utopian, one who made utopia happen.
Behind his stern expressions was a charismatic man, one who persuaded engineers to work for the good of society.
It was incredible how he could create disciples with his talk about cooperation and goodwill and straightforwardness and the importance of always acting in the proper way for the long run, never being expedient for the here and now. On the other hand, if he didn't inspire you, if you didn't become his disciple, you were more than likely to find him a bit narrow-minded, a bit dogmatic, and quite a bit paternalistic, and find him altogether too much to take.
Beside Morgan on the TVA board sat a man young enough to be his son, a man with no engineering skills whatsoever. David Lilienthal was a Harvard-educated lawyer who was picked for his brilliant legal mind and keen sense of politics. Lilienthal had forged his reputation by attacking utility companies in Chicago and Wisconsin. He'd won huge refunds for customers who'd been overcharged by the phone company. While Arthur Morgan saw TVA as a giant engineering experiment, Lilienthal saw something else.
Well, of course, course, we were surprised. I guess you could almost say we were shocked. To build dams meant that land would be taken. If land was taken and flooded, it meant that homes would be taken. The demands that it made on our culture and on our way of life, on our sense of family and of place, this was not happy.
TVA launched an exodus of epic proportions. 15,000 families were told they'd have to move. Their property would be flooded by the backwash of the giant dams. Homes were bought by the government and destroyed. The reservoirs would also claim the heart of the valley's agricultural community. 300,000 acres of farmland would be flooded forever. The project was so invasive, it would even disturb the dead. Entire cemeteries were unearthed and moved to higher ground. Tennessee hillfolk are known for their pride and independence, and there were fears that violence might erupt, but it did not.
It's a little difficult for the federals to come down to this valley and tell people how to live their lives. That problem, well, it was a problem, was solved because the feds brought jobs, and that's what this valley needed above anything else.
In fact, people poured out of the foothills to sign up for construction work. TVA was hiring like no one had hired before. Thousands of jobs for common laborers and skilled technicians. High-paying work was something the valley had never known. With TVA taking all comers, things were looking up.
My name is William Edwards, I live down Cold Creek Way. I'm working on that project they call TVA. The government began it when I was but a child. But now they are in earnest and Tennessee's gone wild.
As a public works project, TVA was an overnight success. The valley was put to work.
Well, it was a very interesting place because there were hundreds of people just like me.
Engineers came from around the country to be part of the biggest, most exciting construction project ever.
We had jobs. We were happy. And we had jobs that we liked.
All up and down the valley, they heard the glad alarm. The government means business, it's working like a charm. The government employs us, short hours and certain pay. Well, things are up and coming, God bless the TVA.
TVA chairman Arthur Morgan was known for his boundless energy, and he set a construction schedule that was nothing short of frantic.
In the early days of the TVA, there was enormous pressure to get the work underway. And there were thousands of people needing jobs. And they told him, hurry, hurry, hurry.
And hurry he did. Dams were going up in record time, and at one point 11 dams were under construction simultaneously. Work went so quickly that foundations were being built while engineers were still deciding how the tops of the dams should look.
There was just so much to be done, but we didn't have to know the details. So we could fill in the details on the drawings later on. Lilienthal thought in terms of the battle, the political battle, the struggle, and the struggle for Lilienthal's career as well. To Lilienthal, the Tennessee Valley Authority meant electric power, proving the case that publicly owned electrical power companies were the way to go.
The two leaders couldn't have been more different, and they began to fight one another immediately. Friends had warned Arthur Morgan to oppose Lilienthal's appointment, but Morgan did not.
He had almost messianic ability to convince people of his ideas. And he felt that if he could sit down with Lilienthal, they could work it out.
Together, this odd couple moved to Tennessee. They'd been given the power of kings to transform the Tennessee Valley. In 1933, the Tennessee River Valley was the most poverty-stricken major river basin in the United States. The annual personal income was 45% of the national average. TVA will continue in a moment on Modern Marvels. TVA didn't waste a single second, and bulldozers were on the move just months after the agency was created. 5,000 local men were hired immediately to begin clearing land. Whole forests came down so that trees would never clog the dams and reservoirs. The logs were salvaged and turned into lumber at local sawmills. The brush was burned in giant bonfires. Once the land was cleared, topsoil was blasted away to expose bedrock. Engineers found a bounty of raw materials in the valley. The hills were rich with limestone, a vital ingredient for concrete. Core samples were drilled to study the suitability of the rock for dam building. Then hundreds of men known as powder monkeys carefully packed the bluffs with dynamite. Boulders as big as cars were methodically crushed into pea-sized pebbles to make concrete. Early on, TVA engineers discovered their mission posed a frightening technical dilemma. To improve navigation, the valley needed a series of load dams with locks so that barges could glide along the river step by step. But flood control and power generation required high dams to trap stormwater and slowly release it through electric turbines. Boats could not travel past dams like these.
This was totally new to develop a whole river in order to get the most you could out of that river. And our job was to get the most out, first for navigation, second for flood control, and third for power. You could build a system to do any one of those three, or you could do two of the three, but to do three of them and balance them out economically, that was the trick.
To solve the problem, TVA would have to think big, and only an agency with power over an entire river could do what planners were about to propose. The main stem of the Tennessee River would get low dams for navigation. The tributaries would get 25 high dams to control flooding and generate power. It was a unified approach to corral water high in the mountains and carefully release it like a gentle wave. With 35 dams in all, the TVA would be the largest water control system on Earth.
We had a sense of making history because this was the first time they had developed any place in the world a whole river system for competing purposes, navigation, flood control, and power.
Not everyone thought it was a good idea, especially Tennessee hillfolk.